Greetings. I'm MK Abedu. I am so excited for you to be here with us at this roundtable discussion following the Africana premiere of Entre Puerto Rico y Richmond, Women in Resistance Shall Not Be Moved. I am a choreographer and cultural organizer based out of Richmond, Virginia. And I'm going to go ahead and welcome the amazing team of folks who made this possible to introduce themselves, and we'll get going with the roundtable.
I can start. I am Alicia Diaz, Puerto Rican dance artist living now in Richmond, Virginia, and dance faculty at the University of Richmond, and really thrilled to be in the company of the amazing people on this roundtable.
Hi, I'm Patricia Herrera. I've been here for 11 years now. I am originally from Brooklyn, New York, Crown Heights. And so it's really great to be here in terms of thinking about making art. So I feel like I can call myself more like a creative maker, a dramaturg. And I also teach in the Department of Theater and Dance at the University of Richmond. I'm so happy to be here in the company of all of you.
Hi, I am Christine Wyatt, dance artist, choreographer, maker, teacher, embodier of liberation and equity and love. Currently living in Richmond, Virginia, originally from Baltimore, Maryland. Yes.
Hi, I'm Christina. I am a doula and a dancer, also an art maker, and I do have the pleasure of supporting young people in the Jackson Ward Youth Peace Team. And I'm really excited to be here.
Wonderful. Welcome, welcome. And just to clarify, I am here moderating, but this is very much a free form and open conversation. And with that, I want to open it up to the team, to how this film is so powerful. After viewing it, I sent something to Alicia right away with, this is what's on top for me. So many things are resonating with me and living in my heart and my body, and I felt so moved. And I can only imagine the vibrations that still may be existing, because this was filmed just this summer, right? Just in the past few months, although I know the work is deep and long. So I'm curious about what is resonating for you, having coming through this process. What is it that you all want to get into? That's right. They're like, the vibrations are too high. Okay? We're like, we still in it.
I don't know. I think it was truly an honor to embody the lives and the narratives of these women who were readers in tobacco factories, who were anarchists, who had all of these rich, deep, I don't know, legacies. And we've talked a lot about this, Alicia. A lot of people don't know who these women are. And so it was really powerful to learn about them and to try to bring their story forward and to bring their essence and their spirits forward. And specifically Dominga de la Cruz for me. I just want to uplift them and really just name how magical the process of learning about them and being in a very rooted site specific space. That's connected to them. Yeah.
When we started rehearsing, we were just coming out of the pandemic of being in the quarantine. So for, at least for me, and I remember for most of us, we were just like, this is the first time I'm working with people doing art, right? So it was a sense of almost urgency too, that to really think about the context of where we were at this moment, and then entering the project with a sense of, oh, these women are living in moments of crisis, and these are the strategies that they are using to live through, to survive, you know, to thrive, right? And so it was really interesting to be in that historic moment. Like, we were in a historic moment, and then trying to really make sense of their historic moment, and being in the American Tobacco Company, I think, really heightened that, because here you saw warehouses that were falling apart, and imagining women in the factory, imagining Luisa or Dominga reading, it really helped us visualize that, just being in that space.
Mm-hmm. That's really great to hear. Actually, Alicia, it looked like you were going to jump in, so I'll hold on to that until you go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to also like expand that historic moment, because this is a conversation between like Richmond and Puerto Rico. Like there's so many, and I think we're gonna get to many of these layers in the conversation, because I think there's many things that are so urgently pertinent, right, to the time in which we're making this work. And so one of them being, you know, Puerto Rico's immediate historic crisis as well before the pandemic, right? In which the veil of U.S. colonialism has been completely lifted, right? And so that we see the workings of sort of the methodology of colonialism taking place in Puerto Rico in the last few years, and then heightened by the climate and chaos, right, of specifically first the two hurricanes, Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria, that just showed what was already a really intense crisis, including an unpayable, unsurmountable debt, right? That is directly connected to the colonial relationship with the United States. And so, to me, creating this work is part of being able to be in conversation with that situation, historical situation, and to think how this work of ancestrals memory and reclaiming, right, and like what Patricia was saying of the strategies that have that the stories of these women hold, right, that we can learn from. And so it's not a work of glorifying, but a work of being in conversation with. And that and how does that resonate to the present moment, right? And to our possibilities in the present moment. And then there's some also like historical imagination here, because we are honoring stories that did not happen at the same time, right? So Dominga de la Cruz and Luisa Capetillo are in different moments. They kind of overlap, but they're in different moments. Luisa Capetillo was born in 1879, dies in 1922. Dominga de la Cruz is born in 1909. And so they are in different historical moments. They wouldn't have been together, right? They wouldn't have been together like we have put them in the film. So that's part of this, like bringing different moments and times into conversation for today, if that makes sense. And then inside of that, the connections that were made through the research, that what connected us historically was tobacco, and specifically the American Tobacco Company, and that came through research. That wasn't at the beginning of the project known, right, to me, and to Patricia. Like, this came through research, and so what are those connections, right? And then finding and doing more research on the women that worked at the American Tobacco Company that would have been in those spaces, and then entering in conversation with them. So there's all these layers of time coming together, and space and geographical spaces that may at first not seem to be connected, but are connected through these shared histories, right, of racism and colonialism and US capitalism, right, that then speak to the moment that we're living right now of incredible transformation that is taking place. So I think that the work is in the midst of all of that happening, right, at the same time. I tried to put a lot together.
No, it was perfect.
Necessary.
Perfect. Thank you. There's more I want to say and jump into, but also, Christina, I'm wondering, what's resonating for you. I know you specifically embodied, this ancestor, Luisa Capetillo, and, Christine spoke to how that process, what that meant for her, how she got into it, how it may be resonating with her. So I'm curious about what's lingering with you, what it was for you.
Yeah. Well, Emma Goldman is like one of my teenage heroes. And she is like a radical early feminist. So it's always really beautiful to find like more women who that was just their principles and their values, and they did all these other things with their lives, right? Where I am an anarchist, but I'm also a tobacco reader, and I'm also, a labor activist and stuff like that. So that's always like really beautiful to find those like chosen ancestors that they weren't defined by their anarchism. They were just like, this is how I live my life. And these are the definitions that other people are putting on me. But also my great grandmother was a cigar roller in New York City, in a factory. So much so that like that's her profession labeled on her marriage certificate. And she never learned English. So there's very little that's been like factual stuff that's been passed down to me. So it was like this really beautiful kind of like embodying, getting to know her a little more, even though I don't have a lot of information about her. So that was really powerful and beautiful and special for me.
Just hearing that so speaks to, in my experience of the film, just being really struck with the commingling and dialoguing, and that kind of the collapse and moving back and forth through time that Alicia is speaking of. And I found myself saying, okay, I'm going to have to watch this again several times because I was drawn into so many things that I just wanted to spend time studying, whether it was work the way, Christina and Christine, that you all were working with the tobacco itself. Also to just, I would say in that deep ancestral work, what I noticed very strongly for me was these altars that existed throughout the film and throughout the space, and just kind of these sacred symbols and spaces that I just wanted to study in and of itself. So I'm curious about that in the way that you all are weaving these dialogues and this, the use of time and the work of time. Because specifically I said, I'm going to watch this again just so I can pay attention to all of that. So I can learn from that. So I'm wondering about that. And then I do have a question too about the work, like the movement work with the tobacco itself.
Yeah, I can sort of speak to this, a way that the collapsing of time manifested for me, both thematically and like in some of the choice makings that happened, in reference to the altars. In Dominga de la Cruz's story of her life, we learned that her children passed away from starvation. And so this theme of motherhood and youth and caregiving, and a particular theme that's been very present for me, especially in the context of this pandemic, is like the duality or just the multifaceted like nature of motherhood and like all of the things that like mothers have in their toolkit that they juggle all at once. So that's something that came up, and in reference to the altars, in one scene, I'm taking out my hair. It was much longer then, but I was taking my hair out of the twists in front of an altar, and that particular altar is a youth altar, or like is sort of a an honoring of like my child self. Or my inner child, I should say. And I also wanted it to honor Dominga de la Cruz's children and all children who are connected to the women who are a part of movements and a part of like this history. And yeah, it was also interesting because we also incorporated photos of our ancestors. And as I was watching it, I was like, oh, my mom was in the film too. And so there's like a photo of my mom in it as well. And so just like that connection of like mothers, daughters, you know, children. Yeah.
I also think we looked at it a lot through the lens of reproductive justice. And so like motherhood, we don't really know if it was a choice or a desire for, you know, these humans that could reproduce other humans. And so looking through that lens and just realizing like the lack of choice that both these women faced. And, you know, obviously reproductive justice being the choice to have a child, to not have a child, and to raise your child in a healthy environment. They didn't have that. And yet, right? And yet they did all of these amazing things. So looking through it through that lens is beautiful at the resilience, but also heartbreaking at like, well, who did you want to be? You know, would you have been doing this political engagement work if you didn't have to survive? Yeah.
Yeah, I made a comment actually to Christina after I watched the film, which was like, I love when we transition like into ourselves, you know, and that kind of agency, like seeing it in the film, like I could like see a physical change in myself, and in both of us really, from when we were embodying these two women to when we are ourselves. And I was like, like it was, I don't know, it's a pretty intense thing to see. But I think what Christina is bringing up is really an important point, right? Which is like, you know, what kind of choices did they have? And, you know, what kind of choices are we making? Yeah, lots of things.
When is that moment for you, Christine? I have an idea of when I think that is, but I'm curious if you're when that is for you. When it happens.
Yeah, it's when I'm in the circle. I'm in the portal with flowers, and I have on like a red top, and my afro is out. Yeah. I don't know. It's powerful.
Just hearing you use that word portal, because I hadn't assigned that to that arrangement. And I was even curious about that because you all dance in it. Christina, I'm thinking yours is a little different. Maybe it has more candles from what I remember. And then also too, this arrangement exists when you are resting as well, and when you're seeing each other. So it's great to even hear that language, that sense of a portal. Was that something that you all were thinking of, that circle in that way? I would love to hear more about that.
So part of if you see the film, there are kind of 3 designated areas that we identified in the space. So there was a space for the altar, and the altar had 3 elements: the altar for ourselves, the altar for our ancestors. And then we were specifically thinking about the youth movement now, the BLM movement now. And so that was also a space that we created. But then we had the space with the flowers in the circle. It's what we call the sacred portal. It's always almost felt like a liminal space that connected past and present. And so there's that constant blurring. And I think that was a choice that we made in thinking about wanting to blur past and present, wanting to blur Dominga and Tintin, or Luisa and Christina, right? And so there was a blurring of self and blurring of historical figures, and yet still honoring what they've done. That blurring, for us, we had a lot of conversations about how much strategies of resistance and resilience are from the past, and that we need to turn to our past to really continue to build. And so also drawing on the power and the thinking of these women was also really interesting to think, oh, this was done then. It could, of course, be done today too, right? And it was that constant back and forth that really helped a lot.
I think supporting also that space of the portal for both of those dances, like for Christine and Dominga, the presence of the percussionist Hector Cocobares was very important. So because what he's playing with there musically is Afro-Puerto Rican bomba, right, which is the oldest Puerto Rican music and dance form, and that dates back to slavery as an embodied form of resistance that still is very much practiced today, and that is a central expression of contemporary protest today in Puerto Rico, right? So it was important. That was a very intentional way of supporting that portal space. And with Christine, we talked a lot about that space also being, so it's collapsing the self and the historical figures, and it was also an Afro-diasporic space, right? So there's some vocabulary there of the movement that was inspired by bomba movements that are very specific. And so in bomba, the relationship is between the dancer who is improvising and the percussionist who is matching the rhythm that the dancer offers. And so there were some elements of that, but then Tintin really was thinking about other forms, right, of Black vernacular movement and dance forms that were in conversation with that. So at that level too, that was a space of connection across different spaces that was at the sort of at the heart of what we want to do, right, of making these connections that are not always immediately made. Does that make sense? Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
That portal also became the portal of self-care. So resting or them sleeping was kind of important in thinking about our conversation of motherhood. That is so much about the labor. And so thinking about how do we integrate that self-care and radical rest in the conversation of resistance was really important.
Yeah.
And in the moment of being in the pandemic too, right? Like, sorry, I cut you off, Tintin.
No, yeah. I really want to speak to what it means to be an artist and to be in these conversations about organizing and being an activist, and how that relates historically. I really want to lift up again that bomba is a dance form that was and is a form of resistance. And there are a lot of dance forms and ways of moving the body and being in community that historically have emerged as resistance against oppression. Other dance forms that came up while I was in that particular portal or circle was the ring shout, which is another dance form that emerges in the Americas in a time when drumming was banned here. And so in that particular form, the people move in a circle counterclockwise, and there's like a shuffling of the feet, and there's singing, and there's movement, and there's dancing. And, you know, I don't know, people really don't, not everyone really has this connection of how art making and how different art forms are connected to resistance. But in our history as movement practitioners, you know, our movement ancestors have utilized dance as a means of resistance and as a means of expressing, you know, just what is even the word? I don't know, but just we not here for it to our oppressors, honestly. And so that feels really important. And I just want to lift up that there are many different ways to organize. And it was interesting to, in this present moment, be in a pandemic, you know, also be posting on social media about different ways to engage politically and to make change here in Richmond specifically. And also to be supporting protests and being at a march, and then also to be making art about, you know, all of these different things. And so it's all, and then to also tell myself to go to sleep and rest. So yeah, just,
sorry.
No, you're good. Just all of it. Just
come on in.
So great.
I wanted to also add to that because I think that that's really there's a moment in that dance in the portal with you, Tintin, where there is joy, right?
Yeah.
And so that space of joy that arises in the midst of all of that, I think is really, it's part of the conversation, right? It's really important. And in watching it, you know, again, just thinking, like, going back to the bomba rhythms, like Hector was playing there with a sika, like their specific rhythms, right? So he brought in the rhythm sika, which is about rising up, right? Like that the rhythm is to rise up in resistance. And the cuembe, which is very it's yeah. It has joy in it. It's about balance. It's about looking and manifesting balance, and there's seduction in that as well. There is this playfulness there, and so those two coexisting in the way that you're talking about, just all the layers in which those coexisting happen, right?
So many layers.
There is. I'm remembering. Ooh. Mm-hmm. No, I was just gonna. I'm remembering, Christina, when you're in that portal, there's also, and both of you do this, there's also an acknowledgement to almost nature too. Luisa was very much connected to thinking about nature and the environment. And so it's interesting to think about how we were in a warehouse where things, there was like remnants of tobacco you could smell a little bit when you walked in the building. There was debris on the floor. It felt old, and so we were also trying to remind ourselves of what this space looked like and was like, and then reclaiming it as something, as a space that is sacred, when in reality it was all bare. Literally when we were there, when we started the rehearsals, there were tin walls covering it. By the time we left, all the tin walls and the roof were gone, right? So what we saw were just pillars by the time we left. So there's also a sense of how do you reclaim a space? And for both of you, Tintin and Christina, there is a sense of beautifying, right? Re-energizing the space from something that seemed dirty to something that's really valuable, right? And has rich history.
Yeah, and as a person, I grew up in Richmond in the 90s, and I was telling Teen this yesterday, there were so many abandoned spaces when I was growing up in this city, and like a lot has changed, but it is always so curious to me as a city that is so dedicated to preserving a very specific history and to absolutely just like getting rid of as quickly as possible of another history. So, you know, it is always wild. It's like, well, why is this space has a lot of history. The ATC has a lot of history and things that we don't even know about, you know, because we're not, you know, state appointed historians or people who do that full time. And so it is wild to like watch a space like that being knocked down, to be turned into like quote unquote affordable housing during an uprising, during a housing crisis. That is like and so, you know, and also like, okay, well, this is like the responsiveness that these people are in, and that the woman working at ATC were in. Yeah, I mean, it was a wild time, and it's gone now. You know, there's like not even, and in a city that preserves the wildest places. Like you'll be going past a field, and it'll have a sign that's, you know, 3 paragraphs long about a battle. So, you know, it can be done. And it's definitely a choice not to be.
I'm sorry.
But I also just wanted to tag on for like the portal space for me. Like, you know, Louisa was a white person. And to just embody that, like her return to nature, I also like felt interpreted as like a ceding of power to return to a place of community support, which is like, how do white people cede our power? And like, actually there's something beautiful in the like giving up of that power and accepting support and giving your weight, giving your power into a community that you were previously like stepping on. And so, yeah, that was what the portal meant for me a lot. That exploration, and also Louisa as someone that wore pants when they weren't supposed to, and was this person a queer person? Like, what would this person's gender expression have been had they had like the privilege and the choice? But then also her performing that act, I think, in response to like, I'm a white person in the Caribbean. I can do these like very performative, shocking acts and still be safe, you know, and that kind of use of privilege is really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Patricia and I talked some about that also, because we are imagining them together, right? But that's how we choose to imagine them together. But how would those conversations have been, right? As a white Puerto Rican and as a Afro Puerto Rican, how would they have been? And so Dominga really does speak to that. Like we have in our research, like we can see that she speaks to that very clearly, whereas Luisa doesn't. Right, that as much at least that we have found directly. So that's another piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm. And then add to that. Oh, sorry, no, I was going to say. And then add to that the conversation of how do we grapple embodying these women when we're not Puerto Rican, when we're not, right? So my ancestors are from Ecuador, right? So the kind of how do we connect culturally, historically, socially, politically to these women and embody who they are, even when we're not insiders, right? And so that is another conversation that we had. Like, what does it mean for Christine to take on a Puerto Rican body than a white Puerto Rican body or a Black Puerto Rican body? And so that was also an interesting kind of grappling and being intentional as to why do it?
Well, that's exactly where I was landing, you know, to stay in that piece of the puzzle that you mentioned, Alicia, because the excavation work that you all were engaged in, that this film draws us into, is not easy work, as you've spoken to, and to do so in this time, and it's blurry and it's powerful, and to be intentional and supportive, you know, and still with the spirit of care, to really do the the undoing racism and anti-racist work within a creative process to really honor the relationship to embodying resistance. I'm curious, and I think it can be very powerful for folks to hear about how you all were having those conversations, the frameworks that you set up to engage this work with each other, because it just doesn't happen, right? And so I know you all were incredibly intentional about that in and of itself. So I'd love to hear about that. As in our last, I think we have about maybe 3 or 4 minutes together.
I
know that's
I went by
fair,
fast.
I said that, and we have 3 or 4 minutes to say all of those things, but I just wanted to let us know that those are the parameters of time.
Tina Pie, you should talk. You should go. You should share.
Well, I'll share very quickly, and I would like to hear from everyone too. But I have been through. I mean, I think Teen, myself, I think all of us have kind of the same facilitation ancestors, like People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And we just come from like a long line of performers that are also interested in really not just performing other people, but like also performing ourselves and performing a better version of ourselves, and a version of ourselves that is safe, that feels safe with other bodies, right? So like when I come into a space with a white body, I need to like talk through some things, move through some things before we actually get to the dancing, to make sure that like everyone's feeling safe with all the other bodies in the space. And I think we took a lot of time, and it was frustrating, it was hard, and more questions arose, and more triggers and traumas, and like, oh well, actually this feels icky arose. But in the end, we were able to safely and beautifully create something where we could bring our whole selves to.
Yeah. And the way that we really made that happen in terms of like logistically what happened, we listed values that everyone who was a part of the creative process, just values that we have as makers, and that could include transparency, vulnerability, timeliness, just like values, things that make the work for you. And everybody came to an understanding, and we ended up forming agreements. And just agreements are ways of being and ways that inform the space when we are together. And so Christina and myself facilitated that with our creative team. And yeah, it was really fantastic to be clear, and to move from a place of understanding. I just want to name that a lot of times in an art process, people just come together and they just like need to do all of this work, and they just do it. And there's a lot of people telling other people what to do, and people just listening and doing it. And this particular process wasn't that. It was had more of a dialogic model, and more of a organic way of forming.
I do also think it was absolutely informed by, we're in the middle of an uprising.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of a pandemic, and also in the middle of a labor crisis.
Yeah.
I like was laid off myself, and am unemployed because of all these things. And these two people were labor activists, and like the whole project is about common care. So it was all of these things where, even though I, as like, because of my training, want to just get things done. Like, yeah, let's just do it. Let's just make the film. It's like, yeah, but is that helpful to me? Is that caring for other people? And also like a space of equity and like redistribution of not only like finances, but also of power, like within a space of creation. Like, well, how can we create together if you think that like you're worth more than I am, or vice versa?
Right.
Yeah.
I think key in the facilitation of Christina and Christine was really centering, or even asking us the question, how do you contribute to Black liberation? And I think that really shifted the intentionality of our project to really thinking more anti-racist, being more deliberate about who are the stories that we are that uplift. We were already doing that, but that facilitation happened right when we were going into film production. And I think it really centered and anchored us into why we were in this space, that it wasn't a coincidence, right? It was this space needed almost a cleansing in some way of the trauma from the past, and kind of to really shift that energy to future possibilities that really are better for everyone.
Thank you. I just love that. Alicia, I go ahead. Yes.
I just wanted to say that also that facilitation wasn't just amongst, right, the four of us, but that it was a facilitation with all the people that were involved in that, right? So that the
Luis Vasquez.
Other collaborators that we haven't named, that one who was crucial in all the portal conversation that we talked about on the altars, Luis Vasquez Larroche, who is an interdisciplinary artist who worked on the making of the altars and the portal, and David Riley, who is the editor and producer who was there, and the film crew that came in. So that facilitation was what was really important, is that it was of all of us, right? It's not, and that's what was needed, right? And that is the work, and that in that, doing that work is the honoring, like Christine and Christina were saying, is the honoring of the ancestors that we are uplifting. Right?
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Thank you so much. I believe we are at our time for ending this roundtable. However, folks can still be a part of this amazing work. Alicia, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about where it will live following the close of the Afrikana Film Festival.
Yes. So the film was commissioned by the Institute for Contemporary Art at VCU as part of the exhibit Commonwealth that will open on September 12th. And so this is one of several works that are being presented in that exhibit. And that is a collaboration between the ICA, the Philadelphia Contemporary, and Beta Local in Puerto Rico. And so Beta Local is leading a digital publication that brings all sorts of conversations about this exhibit into online accessibility. So the film will also be part of that digital publication, and I believe that will start maybe in October or November, and then will be up for a year. And so the film will be available that way as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm also, we have to wrap up, but I also am drawn to, is there another way to say, do people want to drop social media information about how to stay in contact with you, to follow the amazing organizing and resistance work that you all are doing, and your creative and scholarly work in the world? If we could get that from everybody before we say goodbye.
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at chriscat_bar. You can also support my art making process and the archiving of this work via Cash App, CC Wyatt Dance. Yeah.
You can support Jackson Ward Youth Peace Team. You can Google that. richmondpeaceteam.org is the website, and Jackson Ward Youth Peace Team is the Instagram. We are completely grassroots and a little baby org that really needs financial and other ways of support. So.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Also, I want to shout out the Dance Union. If you're interested in ways that dance and activism and organizing are merging together, I highly recommend listening to the Dance Union podcast. Shout out to my homies, as well as Urban Bushwoman.
I also want to lift up that the name of the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond was spoken to as a collective of anti-racist organizers and educators based out of New Orleans, Louisiana. If you would like to learn more about their work, please look them up. And did anyone else want to drop some information so folks know how to get in contact with you before we head out?
I wanted to also say another organization that I work with, Pepatian, in the Bronx in New York, and particularly a project that we are doing called Dancing La Botánica, La Tierra Vive, that is a forum and a platform for Latinx artists, dance artists and collaborators. And so that is an organization that I am interested in uplifting in the midst of this conversation. As well.
Great. Thank you so much again. This was wonderful. And I look forward to watching the film again and again over the next year. And thank you to the Afrikana Independent Film Festival for all of the magic of this, bringing us all together. Thank you, everyone. Take care, peace, and blessings.
Thank you so much, MK.
Thank you.
I know. Virtual hug.